Welcome everyone to our today's webinar, Managing Data Minimization and Least Privilege with AutoClassification. We're so glad you could join us. With me today is Sandy Sirkes, who is the co-founder and CEO of Valora Technologies, and myself, Jen Nelson. I'm the VP of Strategic Solutions at Valora. So welcome everybody. Loving to see some familiar faces. You are here on May 22nd with today's webinar. And if you've missed any of the others in our series, then welcome you to go online and access the recordings from our website. And then we've got a few coming up. This is our last one before the summer, but then in the fall we've got some coming up. So please go online and register for those if you're interested. For the webinar today, the slides will be sent out afterwards, as well as a link to the recording so that you can go back and listen to anything that might be of interest there. And with questions, I encourage you to ask questions as we go. You can absolutely save them to the end if you like. We will leave some time at the end for that, but if you'd like to ask them along the way, then we will answer them along the way. And I have no problem interrupting Sandy while she's talking, so do not hesitate. So a bit about Valora. If you're new here, I see again a lot of familiar faces, and welcome back. And for those who are new, just a little bit about Valora Technologies. So we are an auto classification platform used by records managers, legal teams, compliance teams to automate finding, identifying, classifying, and the defensible disposition of content regardless of where it lives across the enterprise. So we come with a combination of our technology platform, coupled that with our methodology and best practices in handling information governance and records management, and then this single pane of glass through our product, which offers this kind of 30,000-foot view of every single piece of data in your organization. So that's kind of what we do, and why we do it is really helping organizations reduce risk and exposure. Now, whether that's from a governance perspective, so I don't know where it is, there's dark data, I don't know what I have, I don't know what's out there, or a privacy risk, which we're going to talk about today. Does the information out there contain personal data? Is it sensitive in nature? Is it someplace where it shouldn't be? And then, of course, industry and regulations on the compliance risk side, which is also privacy compliance as well. You know, does it exist out there when it shouldn't, where it shouldn't, who has access, and all that jazz. So that's really how we help our clients, because everybody has the same problem. You are not alone if you're sitting in your IG seat thinking, you know, I've got this thunderstorm of data and uncertainty. Everyone is in the same boat, and that's why we're here to help. So we connect. Everybody has these questions of, you know, what do I have? Where is it? I don't know what it is. It's dark data. You know, Becky left 20 years ago and her email's still, you know, on a file share somewhere. This is the risk. Having all of these disparate systems, you know, structured and unstructured and on-prem and cloud. And we kind of come at it in a very structured way. First, we find stuff. So we're going to connect to all these systems and find it. So we're going to scan the repositories. It doesn't matter where it is. We're going to get it. We're going to find it. And then we're going to evaluate and analyze it. So we're going to do a full text content classification and analysis so that we can classify this is this document type, and this is this record class, and this is how long we should be keeping it. So once we classify it with what it is, we can also tag it to how we're going to handle it. This needs to be disposed of in 5 years after said date. And then we keep going back. So every single day, as soon as you do a data map, it's out of date the second later. So we keep going back and reprocessing, always looking for new data and always looking for anything that has been edited so that we can apply at that point of, you know, in inception, we can apply those tags and manage it through its life cycle from day one. And when you know what it is, and you know where it is, and you know what it's inside and what policy to apply, you understand the risk, you know who owns it. This is what you get. You get all of your disparate system kind of into this one very cohesive dashboard. And that's kind of a few of the reasons why we're a little different. Pardon me, I'm getting over a cold. What makes us a little different is true auto classification. And when we say true, we mean it is auto, meaning that there are not humans involved in it. We're not asking you to classify this human. Does this contain sensitive data? Is this a record? We're not asking you, we're telling you based on the content of each file. So we do a full text analysis. We're not just looking at the file metadata. And regardless of where it lives, repository agnostic, doesn't matter where it is. We will access it and we will find it and we will analyze it. We're a sophisticated offering. By what we mean when we say that is we're looking at into the content. So event-based triggers, meaning not last modified date. I want to know the inside the contract details, execution date or renewal date or permanent termination date. We're looking for that more sophisticated real-time offering. Complete customization. No two businesses are the same and no two classification projects are the same. So we make sure that it's completely customized to your business. And we're always looking one step ahead. If if your big pain point is dark data, we don't know where everything is, we're always thinking, what else can we be looking for? If we're looking for a PII, why don't we look for this? If we're looking for ROT, why don't we look for, records and retention and other information? So we really take this kind of cross-functional approach of what else can we do while we're looking for one thing. And of course, we are data experts. Sandy and team have over 24 years now this year, maybe, experience.
Yeah.
That's right. So that's just what we bring to the table, and that's just what makes us a little different. So that's a little bit about us and a little about everybody on the call today, or if those folks who are registered, or if you're watching this after the fact. There's a few polls that we put out when we put our registrations out, because we'd really like to know who's attending so that we can kind of tailor the discussion to who's on the call. So of course, as usual, we've got more records folks, and that's exactly who needs to be here when learning about, certainly today's topic of data privacy, data minimization, certainly, and then least privilege. So it's nice to see everybody there. And then challenges, we always ask about, what is your big pain points now in this year? And of course, right across the board, from cleanup to automating business processes to managing policies. And then always, oh my God, everything. So it's nice to see. And of course, we hope that you can take something away from today that will help with some of this as well. So our agenda today, we are going to be talking about data privacy, data minimization, provenance and lineage, and what are these things and why should I care? And then where does that meet? And that's the part that is like, oh, when you're talking RIM, IG, and data privacy, where do these two practices intersect? And then how to best stand up a data minimization program, and then using auto classification to help with this, because it's a great tool to be able to kind of throw at it and manage it. So again, I encourage you to ask questions as we go. And if there are no questions at this point, I will hand it over to Sandy.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Much appreciated. Get ready, everybody. We're going to dive in. The focus today is mainly about data minimization, because it is the up and coming practice, and it is the regulatory hurdle that everybody has to get over. But we will cover the other issues as well. So we're going to start with what I call the 4 Ds. What are the 4 Ds? There's data privacy, data minimization, data provenance, and data lineage. And we're going to talk about all 4. If you attended our session last month, that was kind of part 1, where we dove into great detail in data privacy. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. This webinar is about data minimization. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time. But in case you missed it, or maybe you have no idea, what is data privacy? It is by and large this notion that people have a right to control their own personal information. So what is personal information? It's stuff that can identify you. It might be something like where you live, or your social security number, or your home address, what we would call PII. It might be something else that also identifies you, like your bank routing number, or your prescription from the pharmacy. All of those things can kind of point back to you and are referring to your personal data. So that's what we mean. And the notion of data privacy and information governance is how to properly handle this kind of data, because every organization, you don't have to be, a pharmaceutical just to have PHI, personal health information. You could be just a regular, you could be a retailer, but you have employees, and by definition, you're going to have some of their information. If, let's say, someone has to bring in a doctor's note about why they were absent, like, boom, you have PHI. So every organization has personal data to some degree, from employees, often from customers, occasionally from suppliers or partners. So it's a major issue that kind of cuts across everything. There are also differences, we talked about this last time, about who owns what data belongs to the individual, what data belongs to the organization. Those are different, say, in the EU than from the US, and still from other countries. So the notion of jurisdiction and the regulatory requirements in each jurisdiction really do play a role in data privacy. Okay. Occasionally, people are confused. They will lump data privacy and data security together. They really are not the same thing. And so I just want to be crystal clear on that. Data security is about threats, whether internal or external, and tends to be at the boundary places, at the firewall, at the folder. It's really not about any specific file per se, only that the file with sensitive information is in a certain location. So that is what data security is really focused on, these boxes here in the upper left. And by the way, this comes from the Storage Networking Industry Association. They have tons of useful data on this, particularly defining the distinction between data security and data privacy, and I found it very helpful. So this was how they distinguished between data security and data privacy, which really is oriented around the actual content of the document. What does it say? It kind of almost doesn't matter where it's living. If it has my social security number, it's about data privacy. It kind of doesn't matter whether it's in this folder or that folder. And so if you want to kind of compare them side by side, it's helpful to understand the focus generally. Again, data security is really about attacks and malicious behavior. Data privacy is much more about the nature of the content itself. The technical focus, data security tends to be about, I should say, firewalls, authentication, things like that, whereas data privacy is about the management, the collection, management, and disposal of sensitive data. Data security, as I said, tends to be at the higher levels. Data privacy, much more granular. You can see which kind of entities and organizations are driving these approaches and who are the practitioners within it. My guess is most people on this call probably identify a little more in the data privacy camp, not surprising. And that is where we're going to kind of focus today. But if you ever need to kind of explain the difference, or what is it that IT is doing and what is it that, records is doing that are different, here you go, my gift to you. All right, so let's get into it. Data minimization. What is data minimization? It's a subset of data privacy. So it is a critical function that is kind of under the data privacy umbrella, but it is specifically oriented around the question, why? Why do you have this data in the first place? Why did you collect it? That, by the way, collection, we're going to get into that. Collection is the initiating point of the data, either creation or receipt. So why are you collecting this data? Why are you processing it? Why do you have it at all? Why do you still have it? How long will you have it? And what is the reason, what are the precipitating factors that will cause you to not have it anymore? So the shorthand is answering the question of why. And so what has happened in the regulations is they have kind of grown up a little bit from this notion of you must retain X kind of content for Y time frame into having to have a rationale for why you have this data, why you are retaining it, why you are not retaining it, and kind of giving that rationale throughout the process. You're going to hear this over and over today. Obviously, data minimization is an up-and-coming topic. It is becoming a critical component of responsible data management, let alone data privacy, but data management in general. And we're going to dive into all the little words on here and get into the nitty-gritty of what they mean functionally and what they mean legally. Okay, so any good data minimization program should have these 5 tenets. So the first is collecting only what's necessary. And this is where a lot of organizations tend to fall down because they will put out, 16 things that someone has to answer before they can execute on the thing that they want. And I have given this example before. I will give it again here, where CVS would not sell me toothpaste until I gave them my zip code. And they're essentially kind of holding me hostage there and saying, well, we can't execute this, we can't ring you up until we have your zip code. And me going, what the heck does zip code have to do with me brushing my teeth? Okay, so a functional aspect of data minimization should be only what's necessary. And that actually should be documented. For this type of transaction, we need this kind of data. Anything else is above and beyond. And the customer or the supplier or the employee should be able to opt out or opt in, depending on how the regulations work in your specific jurisdiction. Okay, so that's the collection. That's the initiation or the requesting and the collection of the information. Then we have processing. What do we mean by processing? So we may take all of our clients' birthdays. Maybe we ask them for their birthday under the theory of we'll send you a free card or a free coupon. So now we're going to process that data and figure out which is the most popular month for our clients. Okay, now you get into processing limitations. You can only process data for the purpose that you originally collected it for, no kind of extras. And so the classic one here is the food delivery service that asks you for your cell phone and says, we need your cell phone in the event there's a problem with your order. Okay, you order your pizza, you give your cell phone, pizza arrives, it's delicious, everything's fine. By rights, they should have gotten rid of your cell phone because the transaction has concluded. If they then start marketing to you 3 weeks from now, hey, want more pizza? Hey, $10 off your pizza. Okay, now they have exceeded the collection, they've exceeded the processing, they've exceeded what they claimed to you at the time they collected that data from you. So now we're getting into, you can hear me using the language that's retention in nature. How long should they keep that cell phone number? Technically for the duration of the transaction, and that's it. After that purpose, it should either be anonymized, which means not that this number equals Sandy Surkey's, this, you say this equals, maybe demographically who I am, but anonymized is one way you can keep data, but not as a mechanism to target me. Then we have kind of similarly this notion of data sharing. So data sharing is amongst people in an organization or potentially outside of it. A good example of that is, let's say something you're going to order requires a picture. So I take a picture of myself and someone in the organization that I sent that to is like, get a load of that, and shares it with their friends. Okay, that is not minimizing data sharing. And that can become problematic, particularly if you have standard operating procedures that say how you are going to handle personal data. So you always want to minimize data sharing. We'll get into this notion of least privilege in just a moment. And then finally, well, I mentioned this earlier, data anonymization, which is if you are going to be keeping personal data, sensitive data for any period of time, and there are some legal reasons that you might choose to do so or that you must, you really should start to look at techniques for anonymizing so that you don't compromise the people that you got that data from originally, nor your operating procedures. So that was an awful lot at once, Jen. Are there any questions so far? You're on mute.
I was saving everybody from my coughing. There is a question, but we're going to save it for the part on auto-classification.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. So, Sandy, you keep saying collect data. What does that mean? Anybody on this call who's familiar with e-discovery, you know darn well what we mean by collect data. But if you're not an e-discovery wonk, basically collect data means either essentially soliciting someone for the data. Hey, when is your birthday? That is kind of a collection inquiry. And so as soon as I capture that, oh, June 3rd, then I have collected data. And what's amazing is what counts as collecting data. And in a nutshell, anything that you can possibly think of counts. So if somebody just tells you information, it counts. If they're filling out a form on your website or on a clipboard at the dentist's office or what have you, it counts. If it's an automated system, please enter your PIN number, it counts. Everything counts. And the thing that doesn't fit in here nicely is, of course, AI counts too. AI is a third-party source. So if you are using AI to do something in your job, and that AI was trained on data out on the internet, potentially somebody's personal data, it counts. So be careful. All right, that's what we mean by collect data. Then we have this phrase, this lawful basis. In other words, there is a reason, a very valid reason that we are collecting this data in the first place. That is called the lawful basis. And what's really amazing, and I always get this question is, well, where is the legal definition of what a lawful basis is? And the answer is you have to define it for your organization. You define it and then you live by it. So you create your own lawful basis, obviously with guidance from your privacy council, from the regulations, etc. But you must create your own lawful basis. So what it means fundamentally is what is the reason or the justification by which you're going to collect data, process it, use it, retain it, report on it, whatever it is you're doing. You are required to determine your own lawful basis. To help you out, the pretty pictures on the bottom are the permissible lawful bases from GDPR, okay? But they are very wide, like kind of open interpretation. Just because it's so topical, let's talk about consent. What is consent? Obviously, consent is explicit and informed. I am going to collect your cell phone so that I can call you if there's a problem with your pizza. Okay, pretty specific. What about I am going to use your voice, Scarlett Johansson, to voice my generative AI? And Scarlett says, oh, no, you're not. And then I go about and kind of fake it anyway. All right. Do I have consent? Not exactly. Did I kind of bend the rules? It'd be really interesting to see how this one plays out. But it is walking on the line of consent. So I figured, why not take a very topical news story for you today? You can get a sense of the rest of them. And when we send the slides out, I have quite a lot of text in the notes section of this for each of these. I'm not going to go, into each one. But for example, vital interests are if, let's say, you've passed out on the street and we need to know what medicines you take before, we can help you. All right. That is a vital interest. There's an emergency situation, a health reason to get at your personal data. That's just an example of a lawful basis under which, yes, of course, you can collect data. on someone in that situation. And there's all levels of that, some very easy to define, some really murky. And most organizations that are, are responsive to data privacy situations are technically required to identify these for yourself. Good opportunity to get some experts in the room, let me tell you. All right, taking us to this notion of least privilege. I mentioned that earlier. Least privilege is this concept. You see it quite commonly in a data security context. So least privilege generally in this situation means restricting access. It's very, very simple. You may not pass. So you can't log into that folder. You don't have permission based on your login, based on your authentication, based on your user class. No, you may not. Okay, it's a very simple and easy data security thing to set up. What is happening over in the information governance area is that we are starting to use this concept of least privilege to refer to the actual data. So if you see, here's a snippet from a document that has been redacted. So some people may see the redacted version because they have the least privilege. That's all they are allowed to see. It's kind of like lowest common denominator. And some people will see that unredacted because they have a higher level of privilege. They are not least privilege, they're something more than that. So the idea in data minimization context is you should always store your content, process your content, report on your content, etc., to the principle of least privilege, meaning for the least allowed eyes who might see it in the chain. So we're going to start seeing more and more of this, and it's actually starting to show up in the regulations now. So the top two of these are current laws. Obviously, GDPR you know about. Hopefully, you're familiar with CPRA out of California. These are the exact phrases out of those laws, and you can hear the data minimization kind of rhetoric in there. And this one here, limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. That's GDPR. CPRA shall not retain personal information for longer than is reasonably necessary. Nice and vague, isn't it? Guess whose job it is to determine what is reasonably necessary. Okay, that's your legal basis right there. Okay. What I find very interesting, and the reason I put the pending ones on here, even though I'm sure they'll change, kind of embodiment a little bit until they are actually passed. But the reason I put these on because they are newer. By definition, they're still pending. So they're getting even more and more specific. Note the Online Privacy Act specifically calling out the concept of data minimization by name. All right. So I mentioned this on our part one of the webinar. Why should you get to know the IAPP? They're a wonderful organization. They track privacy in every which way from Sunday. And this is the slide that I put up in March. This was the current state of US privacy legislation on our webinar, March, whatever it was, early in March. And I just want you to see the change from March to May, okay? Take a look kind of here in the middle. Look at the yellow section. Okay, so just take that in 2 months, how much has changed? So good job, Nebraska, Minnesota, Kentucky, and New Hampshire. Well done. Not so good. A couple of others. We'll leave you guys. You can remain nameless. But basically, what this, if you're not familiar with this is the patchwork of privacy regulation in the United States. This is only going to get worse and not better. And each subsequent law tends to learn from the ones before. That's why you're seeing things like data minimization start to show up in them when the earliest ones were a little softer on that topic. You're definitely going to see data minimization more and more and more. Why? Because the more you minimize the data to essentially its essential core, the less AI can get at, the less a breach can get at, the less you need to worry about any discovery, the less you guys have to worry about and records retention. There are a lot of incentives driving kind of efficient management of content. And so data minimization is now just kind of joining the chorus. Okay, there were a couple other terms to know that kind of go side by side with data minimization. So data provenance is the first one. So basically, data provenance is this, again, we're getting into that why notion a little bit more. It's kind of referring to, well, where did this come from? So it's sort of like, why do we have it? Where did it come from? How did it transform along the way? Who's using it? What are they using it for? Right, that usage question comes fundamental in data privacy regulation. How are you using my data, and how does that match what you said? Okay, so data provenance is really looking to kind of establish that validity and that kind of Scout's honor usage throughout the life cycle. So typically this is done with use of extensive metadata. Yay, extensive metadata. Nobody likes that more than me. Yes, of course, extensive metadata. We're going to get into that in a minute too. What do we mean by that? Just know that if you're talking about auto-classification, the automated generation of metadata, extensive is wonderful. Why get a little metadata when you can get it all, particularly if you're going to be needing it for these kinds of purposes. So we'll show that in a second. And then finally, this starting to have this notion of auditable activity, a traceable record. Well, I gave you this data here. What did you do with it? Not just do you have it, but what did you do with it? GDPR, you can tell, is a little bit older. Mostly it says, what do you have on me? Okay, giant, I don't know, bank. What do you have on me? That tends to be the GDPR. That tends to be the data subject access request. What is starting to change in the laws and just in the zeitgeist is, why do you have it and what are you doing with that? Are you profiling me? Are you actively going to change my premiums because you're tracking some kind of usage of mine or some kind of personal data of mine? The classic example of this would be, suddenly the coupons show up for diapers and bottles and baby gear because somebody in the household is pregnant, and that kind of thing. That data provenance is aiming to get at that. Okay, so ultimately, data provenance answers, what is this information? What is this document? And why do we have it? Is it legit for us to have it? So then that takes us to data lineage. And just like data security and data privacy, people sometimes use those interchangeably, although by and large now we're understanding the difference, and we had that handy slide from before. Same thing here. People tend to mix up data lineage and data provenance. I gave you data provenance just a minute ago. Data lineage is the subset. It's a much smaller capability, and it is specifically about the flow of data. How do you know you're talking about data lineage? Probably because you're looking at a flow chart, okay? Well, this data gets captured here, then it goes to there, and then it goes into this system, then they add these things to it, then it transmutates that way. That's data lineage. It's literally tracking, just like, like your personal family tree lineage, it's tracking the lineage of the data. So you tend to see things that look like flowcharts when you're talking about data lineage. It's often used to assess impact. So for example, something like, well, what would happen if we no longer asked our toothpaste customers for their zip code? What would happen? Would the systems melt down? Would we lose some kind of critical thing? Or would we benefit from an increase in sales, right? So again, that kind of impact analysis, that analytical side of it, that is, data lineage tends to be the domain of data scientists. You kind of hear that in the background. So it is also sometimes used to identify validity and trustworthiness, which is, the more I thought about this, kind of funny, because in the records and information governance world, we have basically just assumed validity in the course of our careers. Someone said, here's my data, and we said, oh, that's a record, that's a record. We never really asked, like, could this be false? We essentially trusted our colleagues and trusted the systems that this information came from. with the rise of AI, with the rise of malicious actors, we really should be asking the question of, is this legit? It looks like, it looks like a termination form for that employee, but could it be faked? Okay. These are some of the questions that are going to start to enter the lexicon. And one question you should be asking yourselves is, whose responsibility is that to determine whether something might be fake? Is it on records? Is it on information governance? Is it on privacy? Is it on IT? Nobody really has a good answer for that. Hopefully there are tools, yes, that can determine data lineage, but that is where this tends to go in this validity, this data flow. Okay. All right.
Sandy, we've got just over 20 minutes.
Okay. So this is a good way to compare provenance and lineage. Again, provenance is more likely where this crowd on this call and information governance in general is likely to spend their time. Heavy use of metadata and classification. And whereas lineage is going to be more about visualization, flowcharts, things like that. All right. So, okay, Sandy, you did a great job. You laid out these 4 Ds for us. Which one should we care about? Let me make your life easy. These 2. Data minimization we covered. That's the pulling back down into the essential core of only what you have and why you should have it. And data provenance, a validity and a rationale for why you have the data and what it's about. Okay. So basically, the closest alignment with the activities that typical information governance RIM folks are doing are these 2 in the corners. Fun fact, if you solve for these 2, if you solve for data minimization, you will pick up data provenance as you go. It's a byproduct of data minimization. So yay. All right. So now we're going to kind of get into it, the part about how do you stand up a program and what do I need to know and what tools do I need to have, et cetera. So just to note, just like information governance when we first started out, again, whose responsibility is this? Who owns this? Who's the head of this? This should sound an awful lot like the battle that you have already fought, which is this is basically information management, records, information governance all over again, but with a data minimization bent to it. If you have a bunch of skeptics, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, we have their objection and how to get over it. So I'm just going to point out a couple of them. You guys probably know these answers, but I kind of built this slide for you to use as a cheat sheet when you get pushback. And the kind of pushback you're going to get is like, this is too expensive. Well, actually, it turns out that it's a cost reduction technique. There's nothing more effective at reducing cost than reducing the amount of data you're supposed to have in the first place. Okay, that's an obvious ringer. It definitely optimizes performance of all your systems to not have a bunch of rot or junk out there, and certainly to only be processing and holding data within the letter of the law. So here are, obviously, reduced risk. One of my favorite ones on here is environmental sustainability. Since that's a pretty hot topic right now, the more data that you can minimize, again, defensibly, it's kind of like defensible deletion, then the better you are for the environment. Thank you so much. So if you do have sustainability goals, this is a great way, it's a great sort of surprise avenue to find budget, because you will meet those goals by following these practices that are kind of demanded of you anyway by regulators. Again, when we send the slides out, each one of these, there's a whole paragraph on it in the notes so that you can speak to each one. All right. How to stand up a data minimization program in 10 easy steps, sort of. Okay, so I've kind of divided the world into what you will need and what you will get. So before you just dive headlong into, yes, I'm ready, data minimization, go, you are going to need to understand the regulations that you operate under. You're going to need some sort of conversation with either in-house counsel or outside counsel about what jurisdictions and what kind of areas you are responsive to. And you're going to have to come up with that legal basis. Just like you had to come up with a records retention schedule, you are going to need to come up with a legal basis. Why do you capture the information that you capture? Collect, to use the official terminology. Okay, you will want those written down as policies, just like you do any other kind of data management procedure. Obviously, you're going to want that executive support, as we always say, and you're going to need appropriate tools. And there is a fair amount of set it and forget it here, but that is no replacement for ongoing diligence and management. You guys know that. So this is what you're going to need to do. And this is what you're going to get just by utilizing an auto-classification tool or something similar. You're going to automatically get a data inventory. Okay, there is no need to sit there and do a formal data inventory. It's going to be a byproduct of having software crawl your systems. So great, you get a built-in data inventory. You will have essentially a built-in taxonomy and records management structure, as well as a data minimization structure. These are, again, just byproducts of using software tools to do these analysis and management. Another nice thing you'll get is what I call baseline tagging. In other words, once software has run for the first time on your repository, on your email, whatever it's crawling, you will have a baseline of where did we start. That's going to help you build an ROI. That's going to help you prove, look how much we minimize the data. It's going to show you not just numbers, but what. Oh, we had this much PII, now we're only here. Or we had this much kind of what I'll call over-collected information, beyond the basis by which we said we'd collect it. Look how we pulled that down. Again, the more that you make a baseline, the more that you assess, the more you can prove out your ROI and your win status. The other byproducts, of course, you're going to remove rot, right? You're going to go through, you're going to figure out what all you have, get rid of the junk, and you will implement automated retention that is privacy aware. You don't need to have two different products. They're working in conjunction. Sounds like a good deal to me. All right. What does a typical data minimization program or policy look like? Yay, big win. It looks like a records retention schedule. So you're probably 85% of the way there already. You just need to add a few more columns. So you're going to need to add information about least privilege. Who can see this kind of information? Executive compensation. Who's allowed to see that? You will also need to add in a sort of what I'm calling the intended life cycle versus the record life cycle, particularly if it's employee information, customer information, right? If we're going down that personal data path, how long did we say we would keep it? And is what marketing and sales, is what they're telling potential customers, does that match your records retention schedule? Maybe you should have a chat. And then, of course, citations. We know citations for records keeping, but you should also add the citations for privacy. I haven't seen that yet as a specific requirement, but you so know it's coming. So get ahead of it. If you're already doing citations for records, do the data privacy citations. You're already paying for it. Come on. And then finally, sensitivity. What is the nature of this content, and therefore, how should it be managed? It's not just enough to go, yep, record. You have to go deeper. Why do you have it? How serious? When will you get rid of it? What could trigger that? Okay. So obviously, if you are on a system that has a single tab for record keeping, you're at a grave disadvantage. You will not be compliant with the regulations with a single field. I highly advise against that. All right. Things can get complicated. And this is what, in case you're wondering, what is your role once we get these kind of things set up and everything's automated and look at it go? You are there to resolve situations like this, right? Like the one I said, sales sells the car and tells the customer we're taking their information for this purpose, and then it goes into the marketing pile for what? Okay, so what does the record person say is the appropriate keeping of that data and use of that data? You probably are going to be the one to adjudicate in some of these situations. Similarly, what if that customer submits a DSAR, a data subject access request, and says, I'd like you to forget about me, please. Well, somebody has to make that call of, well, I can't completely forget about you because you from us. So I need to keep a record of that transaction. What gets forgotten and what not? See the subtleties? Who best to answer that question other than a records person? And then, of course, the fun thing, oh, but wait, no, it's under legal hold. Ha, 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 no getting rid of anything ever, right? So who has the skills to walk all those kind of blurry lines? It's you. So suddenly this notion of past retention, again, records have always been this notion of, oh, for the love of God, Jen.
Oh my God, he's mowing his lawn?
For those who don't know, not a webinar goes by without my neighbor having to prune his bushes at the exact moment of my webinar.
How many times a day do you have to do that? I swear.
Exactly. But hopefully it's not interfering too much with the sound.
No, we can't hear it, so that's okay.
Okay, wonderful. So we have in records, we've been dealing with this notion of past retention. Okay, we've gotten to here, it's past retention. We'll just hang on to it. It's not that critical to keep something past retention. When you get into data minimization, that is a huge problem. You are not supposed to keep it any longer than. So we have this notion of no shorter than, no longer than, kind of at loggerheads. And so now we have this notion of a window, a proper window in which we should retain something. No longer than the requirements for data minimization, but no shorter than the requirements for records management. Hopefully, they're not upside down. I probably don't need to tell you all this, but I'm often trying to put the message out in the industry. Don't just retain things because you can. If you retain it, it's discoverable. And now you might be in violation of data minimization requirements.
Danny, we got about 10 minutes.
Thank you. So when we get to that, okay, we really actually need to deal with this. There now is a penalty to just keeping everything forever. We actually need to delete it when we said we would or when our policies say we would, because we will now be violating the data minimization statutes. Okay, so there you go, RIM and IG folks. There's the gift you were waiting for to turbo boost the argument that I'm sure you have all been making. Okay, so I'm going to kind of gloss over this one. Again, this is another one where I have a lot of reasons why AutoClassification is going to help you establish and maintain the principles of data minimization. Every one of these has a deeper dive in the notes. You can take a look. I have mentioned a bunch of them in passing, so I'm going to move forward. So if you've been on any Valora webinars or you've heard me or Jen speak in the past, you have seen this document. And what AutoClassification is doing in the case of this contract is pulling out all kinds of attributes. That's the orange. It's then using that to go through a set of rules and algorithms to classify and say, oh, it's this kind of record, therefore it has this kind of retention and this kind of handling and this kind of sensitivity. And this is typically where we had stopped. In fact, it's where our slide usually stopped. And then along came the notion of data privacy and data minimization. And now we have to add a bunch of new stuff. Okay, the why, the rationale. Why do we have this? Well, it was required to do business with blah-de-blah organization. Well, what is the basis date? And surprise, surprise, the basis date is not the date of the agreement. It's the date I collected it, right? So presumably that is sometime earlier than the effective date of this contract. Does it contain personal data? No. Okay, good. So this one's a little bit off the hook. Another thing we have to start tracking is what is the kind of what I call permissible utilization? What are the purposes that this data may be used for based on what we said at the time we collected it? Okay, we're getting pretty sophisticated now. Easily managed with metadata fields, but you have to be able to parse documents to pull that out. Okay, so here's a whole new set on the left, the red, a whole new set of fields and information that we really should be tracking for each piece of content. So again, on the right, these are the attributes. Here's your records. Here is your data privacy stuff. Here's another example of something that does have PII. Again, I've used this before, and we would typically say, yep, PII all over the place. Here's how we need to classify it as a record and this kind of, handling. Now let's layer in the data minimization fields. And you can see this does contain personal data. There's all kinds of limitations on how I might use this. All right. So the good news is, if you're using an auto-classification solution, you don't have to do this by hand, and God help you if you did. Okay? You have the software do the work for you. Don't panic, because what you see is beautiful charts and graphs, because the software has done the work and presented it up for you. This is Valora's Black Cat. It is our single pane of glass that is going to bring all these things together and show you, here's where the personal data is, here's the basis for collection, here's what's coming due on a minimum window, here's what's coming due on a maximum window, here's what's under legal hold regardless of window, and so on and so forth.
Sandy, there's a question. We saw an example of the contracts. How does it handle photos?
So photos are tricky. Some photos have a little bit of metadata hidden underneath them. Might include a date and a timestamp, might include maybe a custodian or the owner of the photo. And if we're real lucky, might include something like latitude, longitude of where the photo was taken. Not all photos have that, in which case now you're into image recognition, which is really not as strong as textual analytics. So that it's relatively limited what you're going to get in terms of metadata for a photo. That being said, AI is getting stronger and stronger every day. I'll go out on a limb within 5 years and say we'll be able to do with image recognition what you're seeing here with text recognition, if not more.
Great.
So obviously we don't have time for a demo of our system today. But if you'd like to understand kind of everything I just explained and see it in action, I invite you to Demo Day, which is taking place September 22nd. And you can register for that. Please do. We'd love to see you there. Mm-hmm. All right. We're down to the last couple pieces of advice, which is data minimization is a big topic, just like everything in information governance. Work in phases. Do a lot of planning, do a proof of concept or a pilot, in other words, a small subset of data, some portion of the data minimization effort, get that rolling, get a couple wins under your belt, and then expand out into larger implementation. And then, of course, don't forget the ongoing requirement, what we call delta monitoring. Delta meaning change. Anything that's changed has to be accounted for. If you want to see what kind of onboarding and operational phases typically look like, this is literally a page out of Valora's manuals. And again, I mentioned baseline processing earlier. You always want to start with that, then get into high operational processing, and then that delta monitoring, just a little bit more detail around that. And then finally, a couple of recommendations of where and how to start. Always start with a pilot if you have not done this kind of work before. One, it's easier to get the budget approval. Two, it's easier to prove out that ROI. And three, you'll get a quick, easy win that you can then take to everybody and champion into the larger effort. Always look forward. Think about what's happening with AI. Think about what's happening with privacy. Roll that into your kind of more standard records activity. Make sure you measure your results. Again, the importance of baseline processing. That's, by the way, not just processing of the data, what's the baseline data, but also the baseline kind of task effort. How long does it take you to pull information when there is a subject access request? How long does it take you to delete expired records? How long does it take you to fulfill an e-discovery request? If you can get those numbers, and even if the answer is it takes 3 weeks, that becomes your basis for improvement. build on success, start with the pilot, get bigger, 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 and of course, spread the word. I have noticed by and large, records folks tend to be a little bit shy about tooting their own horn. And I would try to disabuse you of that, because in many ways, there is no greater thing that you're doing for your organization than saving them from potential lawsuits down the line. So good on you. Go put it out there. And then last but not least, a lot of the information I talked about today can be found from some of these sources, not the least of which Valora's website, naturally. We do have a new ebook coming out on all of these topics. I think we have everybody's name who's an attendee, so I think you'll automatically get that. But feel free to drop me a line or Jen a line, or come visit us, and hope to see you at our next webinar or anywhere else in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to take questions if there are.
Yeah, we do have a question. Our first question was about the photo, so that was interesting. Second question is, an organization is planning to use the virtual remote assistant in Salesforce soon to help consumers in real time. Are we aware of any privacy or retention issues with Salesforce?
Yes. I would encourage whoever that is to contact us offline. That type of, kind of AI assistant, capture the screen, capture the conversation, is kind of a privacy train wreck. I'll leave it at that. Absolutely would encourage whoever that is to contact me or Jen offline, and we can help you navigate that. There are a lot of issues with that, so not Salesforce specifically, but that kind of concept.
Mm-hmm. These are our email addresses here. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Lorraine, I'll talk to you later about that. And we invite you, if you haven't seen a demo, if you'd like to book a demo with us, that would be great to see you there. And any of our other webinars, check it out online. And yes, we thank you very much for your time and attention today. And I expect the slides with those helpful notes that Sandy was talking about, and a copy of this webinar in your inbox in the coming days. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.